Welcome to Fostering Bridges, a podcast dedicated to uplifting, supporting, and empowering foster, adoptive, and kinship parents.
Well, this morning I am interviewing Jana Morris. Jana has all sorts of experience in the foster adoptive kinship world. Jana, thank you for being on this morning. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for inviting me.
Good. I really, it did not go unnoticed that I initially asked you and your husband, and within one text, it was all landed on you to do this interview. So what's up with that? Let's call John out while we're on the line here.
Well, funny thing about that, when I did schedule the time, he's like, wait, he didn't want to interview me. And I'm like, you sent him to me to schedule.
Uh, I talked to him multiple times, and yeah, no, yeah, that's his doing. But would love to
Yeah.
chat with him if he wants to be on one of these days. So, so Jana, I mean, I know about you, but someone listening may not. So, give us a little bit of a rundown. If I remember right, you guys within like a week went from 0 children to 5 children. Is that right?
Yeah, it wasn't quite a week, but it kind of felt like a week with a
Okay.
blur. So, yeah, our parenting journey through foster care started in December of 2004. And we received our first placement, a little baby, straight from the hospital. And within 2 weeks, we got our second call and placement. And that probably was a real pivotal call because that child had significant more needs, was 3.5 years old, a lot of behaviors already. So definitely a child that they were having difficulty placing. And I remember John and I having a very honest conversation of, he was like, I just don't know about this. And I said, well, if this is what the Lord's called us to, this is it. And so that was kind of, I feel like that was the pivotal moment where like we were all in, so to speak. And then it was rapidly from that point over the next 3 months that we went from 0 to 6, all being under the age of 6 for that first kind of round of
Wow.
placements that we had. So yeah.
Now, so you just said that you were called to it, and so how do you know? Like, what was the thought process? Like, what led up to you guys deciding we're called to having 6 children in our house? I'm sure it didn't start with
Yeah.
six, but
Yeah.
what was your thought process before that? How do you know that God was calling you to do that?
Yeah. So John and I had been married at that point for 4 or 5 years, I guess 5 years now. And hadn't started a family the traditional way, had kind of explored all those options, including international adoption, IVF, some of those things. And none of that just settled right with us. We were newer in our faith. We both grew up in church, but had returned to church probably a year and a half into our marriage.
Hmm.
So fairly new as adults, navigating faith and what it means to live out of faith and honor and follow God. But nothing felt right that we kind of talked about. And just we happened to run into a family friend that had these adorable twin boys. And she said, oh, I'm a foster mom and I'm fixing to adopt these kids. And I'm like, really? And she said, yeah, you should come to the informational meeting on Tuesday. That was a Saturday. We went on Tuesday and we signed up for the classes. That was in September. And then we got our first placement in December. Now, that's not typical. That was
Right.
years ago. Things don't move that fast anymore. But I think for us, the way I knew that it was is every time it felt impossible or like this isn't, the door opened or someone came along and not that it was easy, but things sure fell into place.
That's great. Did you think from the beginning or when you went into it, were you thinking foster to adopt? Were you thinking we're going the adoption track, or was it just foster care and we'll see what God does?
Yeah. So originally it was going to be foster to adopt. Like that was the purpose. We would
Yeah.
we would foster so that we could have kids. And then just through those few months where we were doing the training and waiting for that first placement, I had a couple of different conversations with others that were in our church. And one family who was such a faithful family had a daughter that was battling cancer. And I remember sharing with her like just my concerns and fears related to fostering and adopting because you just never know if things work out. I mean, we've all read the stories. Some of us have even
Right.
experienced these. And so I was really nervous. And so she was praying with me and mentoring me and supporting me. And she had shared even with our daughter that God gave us, that I gave birth to, that I've raised now for 17 years, there's just no guarantee on how long you will have your children on this earth. They're His, and He gives them to us to raise and love and show them Christ. And that was just a really pivotal, like, I think, another moment for me to think about, like, you're right, God, if this is what you want, and if it's only for a day, this is what we'll do. And one of the things I think John and I did that maybe others didn't, which we were older. I say we were older. My mom says I was still a baby, but I was mid-20s. John was hitting his 30s. Is we were very intentional in speaking what our purpose was in fostering. And so for us, we walked into this knowing that we wanted to show unconditional love in a very tangible way to children that they otherwise would not necessarily experience,
Right.
so that we could point them back to Christ, because that's what He gives us, is this unconditional love. So that's what we've done. I tell my kids every time I talk to them, even the ones that are off in college, like, there's nothing you can do today that makes me love you more, and there's nothing you can do that's going to make me love you less.
I love that.
Yeah.
So 21 years since that started, and over the years, roughly how many kiddos have gone through your house?
So we ended up adopting 7, and then we had 5 other kids that were in and out. One that left, actually 2 that left and came back. Older kids that were teenagers that were placed with us for whatever reason, were moved and then came back. And those 2 kids, they're not kids anymore, they're adults. Those 2 kids still call us. And so we still have a relationship with them, which is really cool.
So not a huge number of placements compared to some, but you ended up keeping 50% of them almost, or more.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's statistically abnormal. So I mean, whatever you're comfortable with sharing on this, but what made that happen? Was it a large sibling group? How do you end up adopting 50-60% of the kiddos that come into your house? Because that's just not the norm.
Yeah. So one of our kids is an adoption outside of foster and child welfare placement. We actually had like 6 kids at the time, and someone called and said, "Hey, we know a mom and a dad, young. They're looking for someone to adopt. I thought of y'all because you love kids." And I thought, that's crazy. We have 6, one of them being a 3-month-old at the time. But we met that mom. And so that one we knew going in that we were absolutely adopting her.
So that was completely private, no state
completely
involvement.
Private. Yep.
Did you still have to get an agency and do a home study and all that jazz?
Because we had a home study, we didn't have to, and we ended up getting to use the same adoption lawyer that did all of our adoptions through CPS. So I had one lawyer that did all the adoptions for all 7 of our kids, which was really kind of cool.
I'm eager to learn more about that, but I want to get to kinship in a minute.
So that was
another day
for that one. And then the other kids, we started with the infant, and then we had the 3.5 and 4-year-old, and then progressively the kids got older when they were placed with us. Mm-hmm. And as you know, unfortunately, the older you are in the system, the less likely your adoption will happen. And so we also got placements for kids that really struggled in other homes and environments. John joked that they flagged our file to say, if you got a rambunctious kid, send them to the
John.
household.
He fits right in.
Yes,
and for you, you already know how to parent John. So
yeah.
Love you, John. Just messing with you.
Yeah. So I think that kind of contributed to it, that they were older, had already been in the system for a number of years. And so they weren't on, I hate to say it, like a wish list, because essentially that's what you can do when you want to adopt. And some do, they say, I want a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, less than 6 months. And I had, a 5-foot 12-year-old that didn't like to go to school and broke windows. Like that's not on anyone's wish list.
Right. All right. So you end up adopting 7, you said.
Yes.
Did you have all 7 in the house at the same time?
Yes.
Okay. So you can relate to me. Yes.
Yes.
Because
in fact, at one point we had 8 kids. and we had that was probably the longest stint. We had 8, and we at one point we had 9. We had triple bunk beds in the bedrooms.
Yep.
We got very creative. It's interesting. The more kids you have, the less space you actually know you need or want, because that means there's just more stuff that's
Right.
hanging around with the kids.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we maxed out at 9 at one point, and the first time we hit 9, because 2 different times we've hit 9. The first time we're like, this isn't working. We actually, God knew what he's doing. We had a 98-year-old living in our house on hospice, and we were taking care of his last days. And the night that the pair of 3, not pair, the sibling set of 3 came to us, he actually died during the night. And so nobody even knew, because it was hospice. So it was so quiet and everything. And the next morning, all of a sudden, I'm like, oh God, I guess you know what you're doing, because we've got another room now.
yeah.
Some people are afraid of the room, not us. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
God was moving people in and out. But that when we realized we thought they were going to stay longer, we went ahead and remodeled our garage into another bedroom. And a week before it was finished, they moved out.
Yeah,
Like,
that's how it works.
yeah. But
I
God was
do
getting us
have
set. So
We do have 2 sibling groups. My oldest 2 are sibling group, and then the first placement we had, her sister was moved with us, and so we did have 2 sibling groups during that
yeah.
time.
And I know some folks are kind of afraid of sibling groups in the sense, because it's a lot. It's a lot to go from
Yeah.
0 to 2 or 3 or 4, like when they all come at the same time. But there is, I'd say it helps with a little bit of family cohesiveness. It gives them kind of a partner in crime and a partner in love. It just gives them a
Yeah.
bond that, thank God doesn't get broken. So, all right. So,
Absolutely.
so did you guys close down after you adopted so many? You're like, okay, we're done with foster care. Or what was the next step?
No, we continued. We actually paused for a period of time and had a couple other placements. But I understand families that have children and then choose to enter foster care, how difficult it is, because we experienced a little bit of that. And it really, God worked on our hearts, because it was like the day before the adoption, the behaviors of the other kids were not a problem. But
Mm.
the minute it felt like that we adopted and like they were quote unquote mine, which is, I'm embarrassed to even say it that way, but that I'm just being really
Right.
raw with what I experienced. It shifted, and it was almost like my tolerance for some of the behaviors and the shenanigans and just the journey of a foster family. We just had a lower tolerance for that. And so we really had to work on our heart. So we adopted and continued for a period of time until all of our kids were adopted and they started hitting the teen years, middle school. That was a really difficult time for most of my kids. Middle school's tough anyways, and then you
Right.
just throw in all of the things that are associated with prior family trauma, adjustment, and all of that. And so we ended up pausing with every intention of going back. My plan, which you know how that God handles your own plans. My
Yeah.
plans were that once my kids left and entered college or the workforce, or just and started their adult life, that John and I would start fostering older kids. We wanted to foster high school kids, and support them in just transitioning to adulthood and being successful in life, just given that that is just a huge need, and many just aren't successful. I don't People don't realize that once they quote unquote age out, most or maybe a high percentage of foster families, they don't remain a part of that family. So
Mm.
they're this single person out in the world, and the
Right.
world's a pretty scary place. So if they don't have a strong community, church family, or a biological family or friends that they have kind of maintained contact with, they're kind of out on their own. So that was a real passion that I wanted to be able to pursue. But
Right. But
we had a different plan.
you hit empty nest for a season, and now
Mhm.
you are doing kinship care. So I say that because I know what it is, but tell me about kinship care and uh, how folks fall into that.
Yeah. So I think when people think foster care, you primarily think of a stranger being licensed
Hmm.
and choosing to bring a child into your home. There has been a movement, probably more in recent years. This wasn't common, or at least not as widely shared when we started, of a family or even a family friend, so some type of kinship type relationship, stepping in and being that foster family. A kinship placement can be either formal, which is the word I use to show when CPS identifies a family. So the child is actually in the custody of the state and they're placed with a family member, or it can be informal, which is where you just have a family member that's raising the child outside of CPS
Right.
involvement.
Which is a lot of the grandparents like in our community that they
Yes.
hit empty nest. So, we just visited or did an interview with John Thigpen the other day, where um, they hit empty nest and they're, hey, freedom, right? It returns
Yes.
after 20 plus years, and then all of a sudden they're caring for a baby. Now theirs wasn't biologically related, but it was close enough that they called them kinship.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are now in a informal kinship situation. So what's it like to go from, to hit that empty nest for a moment and then all of a sudden end up with a baby back in the house when you guys are in your early 50s?
I'm not in my 50s
Oh,
yet, but
sorry,
John is
John.
well into his.
Well, you're just so mature. I assumed you
That's
were older than me, but
Yeah. Well, I joke that I raised 7 kids in 18 years because essentially our first placement is the youngest of the 7 that we
yeah.
raised. So I raised 7 kids in 18 years. I said that literally makes me 187 years old because
Oh,
that's a lot of kids to raise
that's
in an
fine.
18-year span.
I love
So
throwing those math things at people that make them turn their head. I like telling people I have 9 children from 5 women
yeah.
to see what they do. So,
They're already looking and questioning. You might as well give them something real to talk about, right?
okay. Well, just so you know, you look like you're about 37. I'll throw that out there.
I'll
Um,
take that.
I know
Uh,
John's in his 50s, but so how do you
yes.
go from at this point, you guys, you could see the finish line as far as
Mhm.
children in the house, and suddenly you have a baby in the house. What's the deal with that, and how do you work that out?
Yeah. For us, there was never a question that we wouldn't step in. If you go back to what we originally started this journey for, that unconditional love,
Mhm.
Christ love, one of the probably most devastating statistics related to children in foster care is just the cycle of foster care and removal. So, our grandchild that is in our home today, her mom clearly was a part of the foster care system, as was her mom.
Mhm.
And her mom aged out of foster care and began having children. And although I don't have current information on the parent at the time, I know that all of her children had been removed and she started having children in her teens.
Yeah.
And so it felt like we were running the same route. We could see that our daughter was just struggling to be able to step up and be a parent and manage all the other things that life was throwing their way. And so we stepped in to support and do it in a way that mother-daughter relationship was maintained.
Mm.
So our situation is unique for some families, but we're adamant that our granddaughter knows who her mom is. Her mom has access to her, and I hate even saying access, but she's able to come and visit and be a part of her life at any point in time she wants to, within reason, right?
Right.
We are older, so we go to bed a little earlier, as does the grandbaby.
Yeah.
But she's a part of her life. She calls her mom. We talk about her. There's pictures all over the house. So it feels different than the foster care where talking about the family, we did talk about the family, but we didn't have a lot of pictures. We didn't have a lot of stories. So my children really lost out in that history and knowing the things about their parents, whereas our granddaughter is growing up knowing her mom. Her mom's in holiday pictures, her
Right.
birthdays, all of those things. So it kind of feels like a bonus parent situation. I do get a lot of questions and probably some criticism for not requiring our daughter to take, responsibility and you're stepping in. I think that's a natural tendency for
Mm.
people to kind of react to it. We
But
have just always felt,
sorry, that just seems unfortunate because
yeah,
here, I mean, it's not like anyone or not many people plan their empty nest season to take care of a baby that they didn't produce, you know. So instead of support, you're getting criticism. That just seems out of whack, like somebody's missing the big picture there.
yeah, absolutely. It's all, but even when we were foster parents, the criticism that we got from people was always shocking in a way. I'm like, well, I mean, probably not the most Christian-like thing to say, but I was like, well, if you think you could do it better, you can come get them gladly.
I, we haven't done it yet, but Dusty and I've been putting together a list, and I'm going to interview Dusty on 10 things not to say to a foster parent, but I'm not telling her the questions ahead of time. I'm just,
Yeah.
but things I've heard either said to someone I know or said to us about, like, because it would shock you,
Yes.
but that's
Yes.
again another day. So,
Yes.
so you bring her in,
Hmm.
you have her, and it seems like you have, as what you were just saying, you have a lot more freedom with decisions and interactions and and really just a parent and control is not the right word for it, but to be over the situation and pray through what you want to happen instead of the state dictating that. So there's a
Yeah.
freedom that comes with not having this be a formal legal placement from the state. What are some of the downsides to that?
Yeah, with us being outside of the foster system, we don't receive any of the state support. So there is like a monthly stipend that helps cover the cost of care. When a child is in foster care with the state, they also will receive Medicaid health insurance. So they have insurance associated with that. And families in Texas, when you adopt, are really blessed because there is an opportunity for certain children to qualify for a subsidy where they continue their insurance, they can attend college for free. You can go to pre-K ahead of other kids. Like there's just some benefits that the state offers to support the child in their healing process and also to kind of lessen the burden of opening your doors and bringing kids in. It's expensive to raise kids.
Right.
We are outside of all of that support. We are not without. God definitely has blessed us. So for us, it's not anything that's a barrier. But I would think, as you're thinking about other families that may be in these situations, just
Mhm.
realizing that the supports that you think they may be receiving, likely they are not, just depending on if it's a formal or informal. And from the outside, you likely will not know
Right.
if
But
it's formal or informal.
do from what you've seen, does it seem like kinship parents and especially the grandparents get the same kind of support that the formal foster parents get, or is it like, oh, they just have their grandkid that didn't go home and so nobody pays them any attention? What's your experience on that?
Yeah, I think because in today's society, there's a lot of grandparents raising grandkids
Hmm.
and or a lot of parents that have their adult kids with kids living with them. That's just kind of where things have
Right.
gone. Um, that you there's just not the same support. And even I will say the training that I got as a foster parent is very beneficial in recognizing the effects of trauma and how these changes could affect our grandbaby. What it didn't prepare me for was the things that as an adult, a parent of an adult, how do you set those boundaries? I think all of us could use a refresher on that because I say raising adult kids, which is kind of silly to say adult kid, but is
Right.
hard because they are their own adult. They can make their own decisions. But you're just not prepared for that. You have no training. There's no one to talk to. Um, and I shared like the criticism of it. There's also you can feel shame as a parent because I think if you were to ask people what success for your kids would look like, I don't believe them having bring their baby to you to raise would be
Right.
on the list of a success measure. And
Right.
so as parents, there's sometimes, criticism of yourself of what could I have done differently? Where did I fail? So there's a lot of emotion tied up in a kinship placement.
How can the community help more? Like, what would you encourage, if it's whether it's someone at church or Rotary or, if somebody knows about a kinship placement, what would you encourage that person to do?
Yeah. First, pray. I think
Mhm.
pray for them, pray that God would help you know how to even approach them and have the conversation. We joked about like, just, I can't believe people say these things to you. I don't know that everyone intended to be, to sound stupid when they said the things they said. Let's
Yes.
just be honest. Like, I've been there and said things like, oh, yeah, that probably wasn't the best thing to say.
Most
And
people
Dwayne,
don't
I
try to
know
sound,
you well enough
yeah,
to know you are in that boat too.
yes. Most people don't try to sound stupid when we do. But
Yes. So just praying and having discernment on, how to approach, when to approach. I am very open and will have conversations. So I appreciate questions. I prefer them not to be in public forum. I prefer it to
right,
be like, pull me aside, take me to coffee, ask me how I'm doing. I think when someone says we're doing okay, you don't take okay because they're not okay.
right.
Anyone that says they're okay is not okay. Um, and I think too, being prepared for the burden. I will say, and I don't know how it was for your family, but I don't readily share, one, for the privacy of my children and what they're experiencing, but two, I don't think most people could handle the emotion
Mm,
of what I share with them.
right.
So if you're stepping in and going to ask these questions, you can't be shocked, you can't react, you can't push away. You have to be that soft landing place for the families. So that's probably the most important. And I will tell you, it's John's pet peeve. It's not mine as much. John despises when people assume he's dad and they say, your dad's here. That bothers him so much.
Yeah.
So I said, but, I said, I don't know how people would, I think they're trying to be polite and appropriate and say, oh, it's dad. Ours is a little different situation because our grandbaby is black too. So
Right.
there's an automatic assumption that we're the adopted parent through that situation.
Well, any final thoughts you would share on all we've talked about today?
I just think that these families that are stepping into this place, we all have a calling and we all have a purpose. And I think God calls all those callings are difficult. So I don't want to say that this is the most difficult or the least difficult. Like we don't need to like compare trauma or how hard something is. I think it just a recognition of how difficult it is important, and recognizing that we stepped in, we chose this. My kids did not. So like I can take a lot as the parent. I think where the church and society could really step in and do more and be kinder and love a lot more is how you interact and engage with those kids. We're I always say big emotions, little bodies, like they don't know how to process what they're going through. So you're going to see some of the worst behaviors and you're going to see them in places where you think they know better. They may or may not know
Right.
better and they may or may not can control it. So that if you want to know how you can support me the most, it's to love my kid when he's the most unlovable. That right there will go a long way.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on today, Jana.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Fostering Bridges. We hope today's conversation gave you new insights, encouragement, and a reminder that you're not alone on this journey. If you found value in this episode, please share it with someone who might need it. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. Remember, building bridges in our families, our communities, and ourselves is a continuous journey. Until next time, take care and keep fostering those bridges.